Hey, so I'm back with another interview. This time we're going to be talking about security, a topic that I've loved to talk about because, it impacts everyone. If you're using any app, this is something you definitely should be on the lookout for and concerned about. So today I'm joined by Brian Reed and Roy Cohen from Appdome. So thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
And let me begin. Tomorrow, or actually when this comes out, it will have already happened. You'll be doing a talk about, can you tell me about what you're talking?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak about accessibility service malwares. It's basically a way that malicious actors are exploiting a very important framework of Android called accessibility services in order to create many attack vectors. And amongst them is the automatic transfer system that basically attacks the user itself and try and steal money from his bank account or his transfer money application. Or the other attack vector that they can implement using the specific attack surface of accessibility services is attacking the server using like a botnet, which is basically a net of bots sitting out there in the world, and that's a lot of computing power that you can attack a server with and create lots of problems for the server with this kind of scale, right?
Right. So let me just take a step back a bit. Can you explain to our listeners why the accessibility API is often targeted by malicious actors? Like, why are they using it? Like, what makes it so special and a coveted thing for them to gain access to?
All right. So I think we need to dig a bit deeper into what is an accessibility service and why do we need it in Android and why do we use it? So imagine that I would have been blind. Yeah, and I want to use my Android, yeah?
Yeah.
I need to find a way to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Android needs to provide me a way of doing that and to use all of my phone applications. So Android provided this service called accessibility service that is basically used for reading the screen for me. I think it's called TalkBack, which I can ask Android, hey Android, please read the screen. It will read the screen for me, and then I can use my application, although I cannot see my actual phone. Yeah. So it comes to help the users, and I also think there are some regulations about enabling the goods that you enable the non-disabled people without disabilities and people with disabilities, right? Can you elaborate a bit, Brian?
In the U.S. there's the American Disabilities Act, right, where we're supposed to make sure there's equal access for people in a business scenario or a government scenario, right? So Google has done a lot of work with Android to make sure that any user of any type with any kind of disability can take advantage of the Android platform.
Right, which is a good thing, right? You want anyone
that's all the good thing
to be able to use their device, even if they don't have the same motor or visual functions, if they have disabilities or impairments. And, I've been covering Android for a long time. It seems like every week I hear about some new strain of malware, with some random name someone has come up
Xenomorph,
whatever the name of the flavor of the week is.
Yeah.
And almost always I open the article and it says, ask the user, got access to accessibility, right? It just seems like it is the number one, at least from what I see, attack vector for malware on Android. Over the years, surely Google has seen this as a problem. Like, what does Google try to do to clamp down on the misuse of this API?
So first, Google started this campaign that when someone is signing an accessibility service on Google, then he has this option of signing it with Google and approving that the accessibility service to not be malicious. And then some application developers can read this permission to use the accessibility service as an accessibility service that is trusted by the Google Android system. It's not supported on all of the Android APIs, which kind of sucks because it's a very, very important part of securing the users. Lots of those malwares are choosing to use the accessibility services because in order to help the users, you need to permit those services to do lots of things. such as reading your SMS, listening to your calls. It depends on the specific accessibility service. Those accessibility services are targeting tons of applications, banking applications mostly, because this is where the money is. Yeah. And they are also using command and control servers in order to get the path into the login page or to the actual to list the actual flow of how am I going to transfer money in the application. Mm-hmm. So they can basically query all applications, those accessibility services, mm-hmm. because they wanna be able to help the users. So after they have queried all of the applications, they would probably send a request to the command and control server, trying to get the path into the, I wouldn't say the vulnerable application, but no, you can call it a vulnerable application actually, because mm-hmm. it's a vulnerable application, because there are ways to protect from that. Right. So after they got this path, they can now take this path and create a chain of events. Like they would open the window, then the window content would change, then they would they would perform an action using the accessibility service, then another thing pops up, then they just listen to the events and create kind of a butterfly effect, but in terms of coding, just getting the next event, the next event, the next event, until they can just steal money from the user.
Right. So like, if you read any reports about accessibility-based malware, you see like it's often used to do all sorts of things, like create banking trojans, create phishing attacks. And when you look back at just at the base level, what the API actually just lets applications do. We've talked about this before. It lets apps read the screen, but also send inputs on behalf of the user, right? So just at the base level, those two things alone allow you to do so many other things, because you can chain together. If you can read the screen, you can see what screen the user is on. If you can send inputs on behalf of the user, then you can change the screen.
Exactly.
You can take them to a permission page. You can grant more permissions. You can grant, like, accept when they're about to send money out, right? You can.
And another thing I'm going to speak about in my session is that there are some ways to make it invisible for the user that the malware is running on his device. For example, running an overlay above the screen, then he cannot see what you're doing below. Mm-hmm. Another thing that many of those malicious actors are using is they are using the orientation manager of Android, then they can know whether the screen is up or down. And then when the screen is down, they're going to try and attack the server using credential stuffing, mm-hmm. and performing account takeover on someone's account. Mm-hmm. Those malwares are quite sophisticated.
So what are some recent technologies that Google has implemented into Android or through their Play Services APIs that allow developers to detect and potentially block malicious applications that are misusing accessibility from stealing data?
Well, the next version of Android is going to have an API call that you can discover if there's an overlay above your app. So developers should be looking for that. I think that's in Android 15 coming, so that's something to watch for. You may have some other things that you would recommend.
So basically they're gonna from certain API, and when Android will keep evolving, so they're gonna, I hope so, they're gonna block any accessibility service on the device that was not approved by Google. Because now when I'm writing a new accessibility service, I think that when an app has in its manifest, like it lists the accessibility service that is hosts inside the application. If I'm not wrong, Google are enforcing that they would check the accessibility service and validate that it's not malicious, mm-hmm. and this way it is going to protect the users in a better way. There is other thing that you can do is to grant the metadata about the accessibility service and see if it was approved by Google or not, and based on that, decide whether you are going to use to let the users use the application or not, based on that.
Yeah, and if I may, Google over the past 4 or 5 years has been adding different kinds of verification or certifications. So if you work backwards, there's the App Defense Alliance, and they have a mechanism by which third-party application vendors can get certified by an independent third party, that they're safe and meet the privacy and security minimum bar requirements for Android. They're now going through and doing that at the SDK layer, right? So we know like supply chain attacks are an issue. So Google's adding the mechanisms to check and verify that these are valid SDKs and that they approve of them and they're safe and secure. I would imagine that they'll continue to do that in many other areas of the environment. You know, we're hoping they do it throughout the accessibility control layer.
And I do think that it's worth adding that blocking all of the delegations that accessibility services are receiving from your application is not an option, because then you wouldn't have usability in your application for people with disabilities. And then you basically lose many of your customers. And I think that this is something that we as the developer community, we cannot afford having, like that people that doesn't have, as you said earlier, like the vision ability that every like I'm colorblind, right? And I wish there was an accessibility service enabling me seeing my screen way better. There are some, but it's not the same. Yeah. So we cannot just block everything. We need to find a way to equalize between security and usability. And I think that the Android developers are sitting in the middle of it. So you cannot just block everything. You need to find a good balance here. Yeah.
Yeah, good balance seems like something that Google has struggled with a lot, because this accessibility-based, malware attacks have been a problem for as long as I can remember with Android. And with every new release, they try to clamp down more and more on what apps can do with the is accessibility tool attribute that you mentioned. But then again, that only applies, that checks to do the declaration forms through Google Play, but then a lot of the malware is distributed outside of Google Play. Mm-hmm. But then they introduce restrictions on which apps can get accessibility when you sideload them, but then developers find ways, or malicious developers find ways around those, and then Google tries to clamp down even further, but then they try to find more ways around that. It's just a never-ending cat and mouse game.
Yeah, and I think it's also like the users needs to be quite more responsible when
Right.
they are downloading applications, because Android is an open platform. Yeah, you can download anything you want, and you can develop way more easily than in iOS. Yeah, but not all the call recorders or the auto cleaners are maybe they show you that they clean your RAM, but it's not only clean your RAM.
Yeah.
It's also like
Also clean your clean your bank.
clean your bank. Yeah.
Well, some of this also gets back to developers sort of understanding enough about the attack vector to make sure the code they write around the accessibility controls has good hygiene, right? Mm-hmm. So are you still using multi-factor auth? Are you checking things for like auto tappers and other bulk things? Are you only allowing one or two login attempts and then you have a wait timeout and you randomize that, right? Do things that basically block from mass attack or automated attacks. And those are mechanisms that developers can make as choices in how they write the app.
Well, thank you both for taking the time to talk about accessibility. I know I could talk about this for a lot longer, but we got to keep
see
things.
you tomorrow in the session.
Yeah. If you're listening, definitely check out Appdome if you're interested in securing your application. And where can people find more about your company and what you two work on in particular?
So I think Appdome.com would be...
Yeah, come to Appdome.com, find us
Appdome.com.
online. We get a lot of great YouTube how-to videos if you want to learn how to secure your apps. They're suitable for developers, not just security teams. So we try to make it easy for developers to do the right thing.
And one of the things that Appdome is capable of doing is protecting from those malwares from using the application that you have. We can do it in many things, in many ways. Just check it out.
Okay. Thank you both.
Thanks for having us.